So, welcome to another day. Today is going to be our long reading day. We're going to have like one of those every week because the book is really long. It's like over 300 pages. Yeah, it's like 332. Looks like pages. So there's going to be one day of the week that we're going to read a lot. So today is that day because you don't have to do anything else but this. Excuse me. So again, there'll be questions. So we're going to read from page 80 to page 106. Okay, are you ready? All right, let's see what happens with Laura and Mary and Mom and Pa, baby Carrie. See, there's the picture for today. All right. All in one day, Pa and Mr. Edwards built the stable for Pet and Patty. They even put the roof on, working so late that Ma had to keep supper waiting for them. There was no stable door, but in the moonlight Pa drove two stout posts well into the ground, one on either side of the doorway. He put Pet and Patty inside the stable, and then he laid small split logs, one above the other, across the door space. The posts held them, and they made a solid wall. "Now," said Pa, "let those wolves howl. I'll sleep tonight." In the morning, when he lifted the split logs from behind the posts, Laura was amazed. Beside Pet stood a long-legged, long-eared, wobbly little colt. When Laura ran toward it, gentle Pet laid back her ears and snapped her teeth at Laura. "Keep back, Laura," Pa said sharply. He said to Pet, "Now, Pet, you know we wouldn't hurt your little colt." Pet answered him with a soft whinny. She would let Pa stroke her colt, but she would not let Laura or Mary come near it. When they even peeked at it through the cracks in the stable walls, Pet rolled the white of her eyes at them and showed them her teeth. They had never seen a colt with ears so long. Pa said it was a little mule, but Laura said it looked like a jackrabbit, so they named the little colt Bunny. When Pet was on the picket line with Bunny frisky playing around and wondering at the big world, Laura must watch baby Carrie carefully. If anyone but Pa came near Bunny, Pet squealed with rage and dashed to bite that little girl. Early that Sunday afternoon, Pa rode Patty away across the prairie to see what he should see. Okay, so there's Pet and Patty. Okay. I'm sorry, that's Pet and Bunny. I don't know why I said Patty. Pet and Bunny. There was plenty of meat in the house, so he did not take his gun. He rode away through the tall grass along the rim to the creek bluffs. Birds flew up before him and circled and sank into the grasses. Pa was looking down into the creek bottoms as he rode. Perhaps he was watching deer browsing there. Then Patty broke into a gallop, and swiftly she and Pa grew smaller. Soon there was only waving grass where they had been. Late that afternoon Pa had come home. Ma stirred the coals of the fire and laid chips on them and began to get supper. Had not come home. I don't know if I said the word not or not, but Pa had not come home. Mary was in the house minding the baby, and Laura asked Ma, "What's the matter with Jack?" Jack was walking up and down looking worried. He wrinkled his nose at the wind, and his hair rose up on his neck and lay down, and then rose up again. Pet's hooves suddenly thudded. She ran around the circle of her picket rope and stood still, whickering a low whicker. Bunny came close to her. "What's the matter, Jack?" Ma asked. He looked up at her but didn't say anything. Ma gazed around the whole circle of the earth and sky. She could see nothing unusual. "Likely it isn't anything, Laura," she said. She raked coals across the coffee pot and the spider and on top of the bake oven. The prairie hen sizzled in the spider, and the corn cakes began to smell good. But all the time Ma kept glancing at the prairie all around. Jack walked around restlessly. The pet did not graze. She faced the northwest, where Pa had gone, and kept her colt close to her. All at once Patty came running across the prairie. She was stretched out, running with all her might, and Pa was leaning almost flat on her neck. She ran right past the stable before Pa could stop her. He stopped her so hard that she almost sat down. She was trembling all over, and her black coat was streaked with sweat and foam. Pa swung off her. He was breathing hard, too. "What is the matter, Charles?" Ma asked. Pa was looking toward the creek, so Ma and Laura looked at it, too. But they could see only the space above the bottomland, with a few treetops in it, and the distant tops of the earthen bluffs under the high prairie's grasses. "What is it?" Ma asked again. "Why did you ride Patty like that?" Pa breathed a long breath. "I was afraid the wolves would beat me here, but I see everything is all right." "Wolves!" she cried. "What wolves?" "Everything's all right, Caroline," said Pa. "Let a fellow get his breath." When he had gotten some breath, he said, "I didn't ride Patty like that. It was all I could do to hold her at all. 50 wolves, Caroline, the biggest wolves I ever saw. I wouldn't go through such a thing again, not for a mint of money." A shadow came over the prairie just then because the sun had gone down, and Pa said, "I'll tell you about it later. We'll eat supper in the house," said Ma. "No need of that," he told her. "Jack will give us warning if in plenty of time." He brought Pet and her colt from the picket line. He didn't take them and Patty to drink from the creek as he usually did. He gave them water from Ma's wash tub, which was standing full, ready for the washing next morning. He rubbed down Patty's sweaty sides and legs and put her in the barn with Pet and Bunny. Supper was ready. The campfire made a circle of light in the dark. Laura and Mary stayed close to the fire and kept baby Carrie with them. They could feel the dark all around them, and they kept looking behind them at the place where the dark mixed with the edge of the firelight. Shadows moved there, as if they were alive. Jack sat on his haunches beside Laura. The edges of his ears were lifted, listening to the dark. Now and then he walked a little way into it. He walked all around the campfire and came back to sit beside Laura. The hair lay flat on his thick neck, and he did not growl. His teeth showed a little, but that was because he was a bulldog. Laura and Mary ate their corn cakes and the prairie hen drumsticks, and they listened to Pa while he told Ma about the wolves. He had found some more neighbors. Settlers were coming in and settling along both sides of the creek. Less than 3 miles away in a hollow on the high prairie, a man and his wife were building a house. Their name was Scott. That means their last name was Scott. And Pa said they were nice folks. 6 miles beyond them, 2 bachelors were living in one house. They had taken 2 farms and built the house on the line between them. One man's bunk was against one wall of the house, and the other man's bunk was against the other wall of the house, so each man slept on his own farm, although they were in the same house, and the house was only 8 feet wide. Oh, sorry, almost forgot to show you the pictures. They cooked and ate together in the middle of the house. Pa had not said anything about the wolves yet. Laura wished he would. but she knew that she must not interrupt when Pa was talking. He said that these bachelors did not know anyone else was in the country. They had seen nobody but Indians, so they were glad to see Pa, and he stayed there longer than he had meant to. Then he rode on, and from a little rise in the prairie he saw a white speck down in the creek bottom. He thought it was a covered wagon, and it was. When he came to it, he found a man and his wife and 5 children. They had come from Iowa, and they had camped in the bottoms because one of their horses was sick. The horse was better now, but the bad night air so near the creek had given them fever on gar. The man and his wife and 3 oldest children were too sick to stand. The little boy and girl, no bigger than Mary and Laura, were taking care of them. So Pa did what he could for them, and then he rode back to tell the bachelors about them. One of them rode right away to fetch that family up on the high prairie, where they could soon get well from the good air. One thing had led to another until Pa was starting home later than he had meant to. He took a short cut across the prairie, and as he was loping along on Patty, suddenly out of the little draw came a pack of wolves. They were all around Pa in a moment. So loping means just kind of leisurely going along, okay? All right. It was a big pack, Pa said, all of 50 wolves, and the biggest wolves I've ever seen in my whole life. Must be what they call buffalo wolves. Their leader's a big gray brute that stands 3 feet high at the shoulder, if an inch. I tell you, my hair stood on end. And you didn't have your gun, said Ma. I thought of that. But my gun would have been of no use if I'd had it. You can't fight 50 wolves against 1 gun. And Patty couldn't outrun them. What did you do? Ma asked. Nothing, said Pa. Patty tried to run. I never wanted anything worse than I wanted to get away from there. But I knew if Patty even started, those wolves would be on us in a minute, pulling us down. So I held Patty to a walk. Goodness, Charles, Ma said under her breath. Yes, I wouldn't go through such a thing again for any money. Caroline, I've never seen such wolves. One big fellow trotted along right by my stirrup. I could have kicked him in the ribs. They didn't pay any attention to me at all. They must have just made a kill and eaten all they could. I tell you, Caroline, those wolves just closed in around Patty and me and trotted along with us in broad daylight. For all the world like a pack of dogs going along with the horse. They were all around us, trotting along and jumping and playing and snapping at each other just like dogs. Goodness, Charles, Ma said again. Laura's heart was thumping fast, and her mouth and her eyes were wide open, staring at Pa. Patty was shaking all over and fighting the bit, said Pa. Sweat ran off her, and she was so scared. I was sweating too, but I held her down to a walk, and we went walking along among those wolves. They came right along with us, a 1/4 mile or more, that big fellow trotting by my stirrups as if he were there to stay. There they are, the big wolves. Then we came to the head of the draw, running down into the creek bottom. The big gray leader went down it, and all the rest of the pack trotted down into it behind him. As soon as the last one was in the draw, I let Patty go. She headed straight for home across the prairie, and she couldn't have run faster if I'd been cutting into her with a rawhide whip. I was scared the whole time. I thought the wolves might be coming this way, and they might be making better time than I was. I was glad you had the gun, Caroline, and glad the house is built. I knew you could keep the wolves out of the house with the gun, but Pet and the colt were outside. You need not worry, Charles, Ma said. I guess I could manage to save our horses. I was not fully reasonable at the time, said Pa. I know you would have saved the horses, Caroline. Those wolves wouldn't bother you anyway. If they had been hungry, I wouldn't be here to. Little pictures have big ears, Ma said. She meant that he must not frighten Mary and Laura. Well, all's well that ends well, Pa replied. And those wolves are miles from here by now. What made them act like that? Laura asked him. I don't know, Laura, he said. I guess they had just eaten all they could hold, and they were on their way to the creek to get a drink. Or perhaps they were out playing on the prairie and not paying any attention to anything but their play, like little girls do sometimes. Perhaps they saw that I didn't have my gun and couldn't do them any harm. Or perhaps they had never seen a man before and didn't know that men can do them any harm. So they didn't think about me at all. Pet and Patty were restlessly walking around and around inside the barn. Jack walked around the campfire. When he stood still to smell the air and listen, the hair lifted on his neck. Bedtime for little girls, Ma said cheerfully. Not even Carrie was sleepy yet. But Ma took them all into the house. She told Mary and Laura to go to bed, and she put baby Carrie's little nightgown on and laid her in the big bed. Then she went outdoors to do the dishes. Laura wanted Pa and Ma inside the house. They seemed so far away outside. Mary and Laura were good and lay still, but Carrie sat up and played by herself in the dark. In the dark, Pa's arm came from behind the quilt in the doorway and quietly took away his gun. Out by the campfire, the tin plates rattled. Then the knife scraped the spider. Ma and Pa were talking together, and Laura smelt tobacco smoke. The house was safe, but it did not feel safe because Pa's gun was not over the door, and there was no door. There was only the quilt. After a long time, Ma lifted the quilt. Baby Carrie was asleep then. Ma and Pa came in very quietly and very quietly went to bed. Jack lay across the doorway, but his chin was not on his paw. His head was up, listening. Ma breathed softly, Pa breathed heavily, and Mary was asleep too. But Laura strained to hear in the dark to watch Jack. I'm sorry. Sorry. But Laura strained her eyes in the dark to watch Jack. She could not tell whether the hair was standing up on his neck. Suddenly, she was sitting straight up in her bed. She had been asleep. The dark was gone. Moonlight streamed through the window holes, and streaks of moonlight came through every crack in the wall. Pa stood back in the moonlight at the window. He had his gun. Right in Laura's ear, a wolf howled. She cringed away from the wall. The wolf was on the other side of it. Laura was too scared to make a noise. The cold was not in her backbone only. It was all through her. Mary pulled the quilt over her head. Jack growled and showed his teeth at the quilt in the doorway. Be still, Jack, Pa said. Terrible howls curled all around inside the house, and Laura rose out of bed. She wanted to go to Pa, but she knew better than to bother him now. He turned his head and saw her standing in her nightgown. Want to see them, Laura? He asked softly. Laura couldn't say anything, but she nodded and padded across the ground to him. He stood his gun against the wall and lifted her up to the window hole. There in the moonlight sat half a circle of wolves. They sat on their haunches and looked at Laura in the window. And she looked at them. She had never seen such big wolves. The biggest one was taller than Laura. He was taller even than Mary. He sat in the middle, exactly opposite Laura. Everything about him was big. His pointy ears and his pointed mouth with the tongue hanging out, and his strong shoulders and legs and two paws side by side, and his tail curled around his squatting haunches. His coat was shaggy gray, and his eyes were glittering green. Laura clenched her toes into the crack of the wall and folded her arms on the window slab, and she looked and looked at that wolf, but she did not put her head through the empty window space into the outdoors where all those wolves sat so near her, shifting their paws and licking their chops. Pa stood firm against her back and kept his arm tightly around her middle. "He's awful big," Laura whispered. "Yes, and see how his coat shines in the moonlight," Pa said. The moonlight made little glitters in the edge of the shaggy fur all around the big wolf. "They are in a ring clear around the house," Pa whispered. Laura padded beside him to the other window. He leaned his gun against the wall and lifted her up again. There, sure enough, was the other half of the circle of wolves. All their eyes glittered green in the shadow of the house. Laura could hear their breathing. When they saw Pa and Laura looking out, the middle of the circle moved back a little way. Pet and Patty were squealing and running inside the barn. Their hooves pounded the ground and crashed against the walls. After a moment, Pa went back to the other window and Laura went too. They were just in time to see the big wolf lift his nose, tilt it, pointed straight at the sky, his mouth open, and a long howl rose toward the moon. And there's the picture of the circle of wolves around the whole house. Okay? His mouth opened and a long howl rose toward the moon. Oh, I'm sorry, I read that already. Then all around the house the circle of wolves pointed their noses toward the sky and answered him. Their howls shuddered through the house and filled the moonlight and quavered away across the vast silence of the prairie. "Now go back to bed, little half-pint," Pa said. "Go to sleep. Jack and I will take care of you all." So Laura went back to bed, but for a long time she did not sleep. She lay and listened to the breathing of the wolves on the other side of the long wall. She heard the scratching of their claws on the ground and the sniffling of the nose at the cracks. She heard the big gray leader howl again, and all the others answered him. But Pa was walking quietly from one window hole to the other, and Jack did not stop pacing up and down before the quilt that hung in the doorway. The wolves might howl, but they would not get in while Pa and Jack were there. So at last Laura fell asleep. Laura felt the soft warmth on her face and opened her eyes into morning sunshine. Mary was talking to Ma by the campfire. Laura ran outdoors all bare-footed. There were no wolves to be seen, only their tracks were thick around the house and the stable. Pa came whistling up the creek road. He put his gun on its pegs and led Pet and Patty to the creek to drink as usual. He had followed the wolf tracks so far that he knew they were far away now, following a herd of deer. The mustangs shied at the wolves' tracks and picked their ears nervously, and Pet kept her colt close at her side. But they went willingly with Pa, who knew there was nothing to fear. Breakfast was ready. When Pa came back from the creek, they all sat by the fire and ate fried mush and prairie chicken hash. Pa said he would make a door that very day. He wanted more than a quilt between them and the wolves next time. I have no more nails, but I'll do not be keep on waiting till I can make a trip to Independence, he said. A man doesn't need nails to build a door or make a house. After breakfast, he hitched up Pet and Patty, and taking his axe, he went to get timber for the door. Laura helped wash the dishes and make the beds, but that day Mary minded the baby. Laura helped Pa make the door. Mary watched, but Laura handed him his tools. With the saw, he sawed logs the right length for the door. He sawed shorter lengths for cross pieces. Then with an axe, he split the logs into slabs and smoothed them nicely. He laid the long slabs together on the ground and placed the shorter slabs across them. Then with the auger, he bored holes through the cross pieces into the long slabs. Into every piece he drove a wooden peg that fitted firm tightly. That made the door. It was a good oak door, solid and strong. For the hinges he cut 3 long straps. One hinge was for the top of the door, one for the bottom, and one for the middle. He fastened them first to the door in this way. He laid the piece of wood on the door and bored a hole through it into the door. Then he doubled one end of the strap around the little piece of wood, and with his knife he cut a hole in through the strap. He laid the little piece of wood on the door again, with the strap doubled around it, and all the holes making one hole. Then Laura gave him the peg, and he hammered it and drove it through all the layers of holes. The peg went through the strap and the little piece of wood, and through the strap again and into the door. That held the strap so that it couldn't get loose. I told you a fellow doesn't need nails, Pa said. When he had fastened the 3 hinges to the door, he set the door in the doorway. It fitted there. It fitted. Then he pegged strips of wood to the old slabs on either side of the door to keep the door from swinging outward. So there he is building the door. This was the way he made the latch. First, he hewed a short piece of oak from one side, and in the middle he cut a wide, deep notch. He pegged the stick into the inside door, up and down and near the edge. He put a notch inside against the door so that the notch made a little slot. The stick was the latch. It turned easily on the peg, and its loose end moved up and down in the slot, and the loose end of it was long enough to go through the slot and across the crack between the doors of the wall, and to lie against the wall when the door was shut. When Pa and Laura had hung the door in the doorway, Pa marked the spot on the wall where the end of the latch came. Over the spot he pegged to the wall a stout piece of oak. This is where it would drop in, so you can't open or close the door unless you lift it up. But there must be a way to lift the latch from the outside, so Pa made a latch string. He cut it from a long piece of good leather and tied one end to the latch between the peg and the slot. Above the latch he bored a small hole through the door, and he pushed the end of the latch string through the hole. Laura stood outside and pulled it through for him. The door was finished. It was strong and solid and made of thick oak, and oak slabs across it. all pegged together with stout pegs. "I call that a good day's work," said Pa, "and I had a fine helper." He hugged the top of Laura's head with his hand, then gathered up his tools. There was salt pork for supper. It was the last of the salt pork, so next day Pa went hunting. But the day after that he and Laura made the barn door. It was exactly like the house door, except it had no latch. Pet and Patty did not understand door latches and would not need to pull the string at night. So instead of a latch, Pa made a hole through the door, and he put a chain through the hole. At night it would pull an end of the chain through the crack between the logs in the stable wall, and he would padlock the two ends of the chain together. Then nobody could get into the stable. That night at supper, Pa said to Ma, "Now, Caroline, as soon as we get Edward's house up, I'm going to build a fireplace, so you can do your cooking in the house, out of the wind and the storms. It seems like I never did see a place with so much sunshine, but I suppose it's bound to rain sometime." "Yes, Charles," Ma said, "good weather never lasts forever on earth." So, like I said, it was a long one today. All right, so I will see you tomorrow. Bye.